Alright, continuing section 6 from yesterday. We are now going to solve our quadratic inequalities in one variable. Yesterday we took our quadratic inequalities, graphed them. If it was one of these signs, the line is
dotted
or dashed, however you want to say it. If it's one of these, it is
solid.
If it's this or this, I need to shade, if the y is here, where my y is bigger. It doesn't necessarily have to be outside. Okay. And if it was this way, I would shade where my y's were less. Okay. I also showed you that you could pick a coordinate point and plug it in to figure that out as well. Thank you. Okay. So that's from yesterday. Okay. We were just graphing quadratics. That's taking you back to chapter 3, section 1, where we were graphing quadratic equations. Now they're inequalities. Okay, today, the only difference is we are going to have a quadratic equation, or quadratic expression, ax squared plus bx plus c, but instead of having instead of having equal or less than or equal or less than or greater than to y, it's going to be to 0. Okay, so we will be able to solve for just x. Does that make sense? Okay, so instead of doing it on a coordinate plane where there's an x and a y, now there will only be x's. Yes.
Is it always going to be that inequality sign?
That one?
Or
No.
would it be a different one?
It could be this one, or this one, or this one.
Okay.
Could be any of them. Okay? So, if they give me an equation, x, and we can do it algebraically, and that's how I would recommend doing it. If they give me the equation, or the inequality, x squared plus 4x minus 32 is greater than 0. Okay? When we were doing just regular quadratic equations with an equal sign, how could I solve this for x? What are my options?
You gotta find they add to b and multiply.
So that's doing what?
Factoring.
That's factoring.
Graphing.
That's not
Okay, I could graph it, I could complete the square, I could use the quadratic. I found most people are either factoring or using quadratic. Okay? Those are the two I would recommend. Okay? They just seem to be the easiest. Unless there's not an x, then easiest would be to move the 32 over and square root, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But if there is an x squared and an x, the first thing I would check is if it's factorable. Is there anything that multiplies to negative 32 and adds to positive 4?
Negative 8 and 4. Oh, 8 and negative 4.
8 and negative 4, thank you. You can just set them on my desk.
Cash came out. I didn't bring it.
I don't know. Oh, I don't get the whole envelope?
No.
That's too bad. So, x minus 4 and x plus 8, correct?
Yeah.
Thanks, Ashley.
Yeah.
Okay. Do I still have that it's greater than 0?
Yes.
Yes, because that's the same thing. I didn't change anything, I just wrote it differently. Okay? So, that means if this were equal to 0, that x would equal positive 4 and negative 8, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You can't just put that inequality there. You guys get what I'm saying? You can't just drop that greater than sign. You can't just say this, okay? Because that's not accurate. Okay, so what we're going to have to do is leave it as equals. You will have to create a number line. On Big Ideas, it'll probably give it for you if it's needed, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have 0. I'm just going to quick do it negative 8 and positive 4. I don't need to worry about all those numbers in between. Okay. Yesterday, when we were graphing on a coordinate plane, my less than and greater than signs gave me a dashed line. Less than or equal to, greater than or equal to gave me solid. Anybody remember what they do on a number line?
Open or closed?
Circle.
Abby, which one's this?
Open.
This is open. Okay? So this is going to be an open circle. So on -8 and +4, I'm going to have open circles. Okay? Now we got to figure out which way to shade. Okay? You're only going to have two choices. You're either going to shade in between the 2 points, or you're going to shade on the outside of both of them. Okay, those are your two choices. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It will never be on the inside here, but the outside over here. That's never going to happen. Okay?
Will it ever be on just one side of the outside?
No. Because you're always going to have two solutions because it's a quadratic.
Okay.
Okay? So, to figure out which way to shade, take your 0, plug it in. When I plug it in, I get what?
-32.
So is -32 bigger than 0?
No.
No. 0 was in between, but that was a false statement, right?
Yeah.
So do you think I'm going to shade in between if it's false?
No.
No. I'm going to shade where I know the answer would be true at, which would be outside.
What if one of the intercepts is 0?
So if one of the intercepts is 0, pick 1. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Pick easy numbers to plug in. Yes.
Where do we plug in 0?
Into your equation. Your
I have a
inequality.
question.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, yeah, there's no other variables. So.
Just to find out which way.
So
to
if your two number, like your two solutions are like 1 and 4, then you just have to like plug in like 2 or something.
Okay, good question. Let's say your solutions are every good here. I'm going to erase this, but then I'll backtrack. Cool. Okay. I'm going to erase this, but then I'll backtrack and I'll put it back up here. Okay? So let's say our solutions are 1 and 4. Still check 0. Because now, if it's on the outside, if it works, then you need to shade on the outsides. Because remember, if it's outside of one, it's outside of the other one too.
But you could do the other numbers.
You
just
could,
it'd be
yeah.
harder.
If you wanted to pick 2 or 3, you sure could. But it's just going to give you, it's going to be harder to do quickly.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick 0 every time because it will be very easy. All you got to do is cover up the front and you got your answer. Okay? But yeah, if it works, then you're going to shade outside, which means you got to shade outside over here too.
Okay.
If it doesn't work, well, it's outside and it doesn't work, so I must need to shade inside.
Wait, so if 0 is a point,
And just pick one. If 0 is a solution, then pick one. Okay? Cole, go ahead.
Did you pick your intercepts if you were equal to?
Say that again.
Did you pick the intercepts plug in if you were equal to?
So like you're saying if this was a closed circle, could you use -8?
Yeah.
No, because if it's a closed circle, I know -8 works. I don't know which direction I need to shade though. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So even if it's closed, you need to pick something else because yeah, -8 works, but does -6 work or does -10 work? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I gotta figure out on what side do I need to shade.
Is there any trick to the shading like there was with the graphs?
There's a trick on how to get to your answer that I can show you guys, but not with the shading really.
Okay.
Okay? I mean, I suppose you could figure it out with the shading too, but
Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah.
on the outside or inside of the parabola?
Yeah. All right. So here, now this is not our answer. This is not what we're looking for. We good?
Sorry, explaining the graph thing.
Okay. This is not our answer. Okay, we still have to know what are our possible options for x. Because our answer is not x equals 4 and -8 because we're solving an inequality. So I know there's an infinite number of answers somewhere. Okay? But what I do know is that since I'm shading, and this might be something you want to write down, since I'm shading on the outsides, this is what we call an OR statement. So if you shade outside, were to shade inside, it's what we call an and statement, and I'll show you that in a minute. Okay, but if you're shading out, it's always going to be or. If you're shading inside, it's always going to be an and statement. Okay? It's going to be an or statement because there is no numbers that can both be less than -8 and bigger than 4 at the same time. Okay, so it has to be an or statement. So our answer is going to be that x, it's open circle, so it's less than -8. So my solution has to either be less than -8 or where else might it be?
Greater than
It
negative.
might be greater than +4. Okay. So if I picked any numbers less than -8 or any numbers bigger than 4 and plugged it in, it would work.
So for this fill on the inside, it'd say.
I'll show you in a second. That's a little bit different. You'll never actually write the word and.
Oh.
I'll show you in a second what that'll look like though.
So, is the answer?
That's my answer. X is less than -8 or X is greater than 4. That's my answer.
So we have to
yeah.
pick like or and, and
No, I think
then
I have.
put in those numbers.
Yep. Okay. So let's do another one. This one's going to be an and statement for us. Okay, but we'll double check it and make sure we understand why. They give me x squared x squared minus 3x minus 4 is less than or equal to 0. Again, I would suggest that you try to factor this. Is there anything that multiplies to -4 and adds to -3?
-4 and 1.
-4 and +1. So x minus 4, x plus 1, less than or equal to 0. So my x values that need to go on my number line are
4 and -1.
4 and -1. Okay. So I graph my number line. I need -1 and +4. Open or closed circle?
Closed.
Closed. So I know I'm closed here and closed here. Now I would recommend plugging in 0. So I plug in 0. 0 squared 0 minus 3 times 0 is 0. So I have -4 is less than or equal to 0. True or false?
True.
True. So my 0 is true, correct?
Yes.
See how it's in between them?
Yeah.
That means I'm shading in between them.
And if it's false, you got.
If it would have been false, yep, exactly. If it would have been false, I'd have shaded on the outside. Okay? So now, since this is an and statement, right? From what we talked about a minute ago, this is going to be an and statement. Are there numbers that can both be between negative, or can be greater than -1 and less than 4?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of these numbers, right? These numbers are all in between them. Okay? This is what an and statement looks like.
You're so right.
Okay? I only use less than or equal to because that's the sign here. Okay? If there was no equal to, then it would look like that. Okay? But they will always be facing these directions on an and statement.
Okay.
Every single time.
So if it's greater than or equal to in the equation.
So even if this says this, that's what it's going to look like for an and statement. Okay?
Because algebra.
Because x is going to have to be bigger than -1 and at the same time less than 4.
So if it was the opposite way in the equation, it would still like.
Okay, let me show, yeah, because let me show you this. If I had, let's say I have -1 And let's say I write it like this. I'm gonna write it in red because it doesn't work. Okay, let's think about what this is telling me. This is telling me that -1 is greater than or equal to x, right? Which would mean I should be over here.
Right.
And x is greater than or equal to 4, which means I should be over here.
Which is wrong.
That doesn't make any
So
sense.
it'd
But
be
could you
less
switch
than?
the two?
Well, if the
If
sign
it's
was
in the
switched
middle
up there,
and
then it would be an
greater
or
than the
statement.
sign?
Hold on, there's too many people talking. What?
Well, she was asking about if the sign is flipped up there, but if the sign is flipped up there, then it would be an or statement.
No, I mean like if you flip the 4 and the -1. It's just the same thing.
Yeah,
With
but
a different sign.
yeah, that's not like it's like not standard form though.
Okay,
You're not
so it's
ever
not
gonna-
like it's
you-
like
would you
putting
would
an
you
X
would you
before.
ever put your positive number on the left side and your negative number on
Okay.
the right side?
Okay, so it's
Right? It's going to be in order. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
I said what like. So if it's less than or equal to, it's gonna be in the middle of the numbers.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
If this would have been +4, would +4 be less than or equal to 0?
No.
No, I'd have shaded on the outside.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
So then it would have been an or statement.
It would have been an or statement then. It wouldn't have been an and statement.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Okay? This part in an and statement will always be the same. You just got to put your negative or you got to put your small number on the left, your big number on the right. Okay?
sweet.
All right. So taking a look at example 5, I'm not going to do one of those problems with you because it's graphing and then solving. Okay? That's what I had going on over here on this board the other day when I was gone. If you had to do this, you would graph your quadratic, figure out where you need to shade, and then basically do the same thing as you would do on a number line. You go out, so it'd be an or statement. You guys get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
If you had to go in, if you were shaded on the inside of your parabola, you go in, which would be an and statement.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
But the problem with this way is you gotta graph the whole parabola first. So it's gonna take longer.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, so I would suggest not doing it that way if you can do it this way. Does that make sense?
Yes.
That's up to you though. Okay, that is entirely up to you. If they gave you the graph already, that's a possibility. Maybe they already gave you the graph and you just had to figure out what worked and what didn't work. Okay, then maybe you would do it this way. Okay, but if they don't specify how you need to have it done, I would always do it algebraically instead of by putting it on a coordinate plane. And that's my recommendation to you. If you don't like that way, then I'm sure you should be able to graph your parabola. That shouldn't be a problem. Okay. Last example I want to look at is example 6. Example 6 says a rectangular parking lot must have a perimeter of 440 feet and an area of at least 800 square feet. Describe the possible lengths of the parking lot. How do we know that there are multiple possibilities for this?
It
These
has like an
lengths.
at least
Because
and
it
an at
uses the
most.
words at least. Okay, so could it be bigger? Could it have a larger area? Okay. So we have to come up with two equations on this first. Because they told us the perimeter is going to be what? 440. So I know that my perimeter has to equal 440, right? How do you find perimeter?
Add all the stuff.
Okay, you add all the sides. Could I also take 2 times the length and then add it to 2 times the width? That'd be the same thing as adding all the sides, right? Okay, so I'm going to, instead of perimeter here, I'm going to do 2L plus 2W. Okay. And it told me my area had to be what?
At least.
At least. What's that mean? Could it be more?
Yes.
Yeah. Could it equal?
Yes.
So it's going to be, it needs to be greater than or equal to, what did it say, 8,000?
Yeah.
Okay. So I know my area has to be greater than or equal to 8,000. How do you find area of a rectangle? Length times width. Why am I saying rectangle? Why am I using a rectangle?
Because it says a rectangular parking lot.
It says a rectangular parking lot. Okay. They just want the length options, right? They said describe the possible lengths. Okay, so I don't need to worry about the width, but I got to figure out how to solve for L, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So to solve for L, that means I have to somehow get rid of W, right? Okay. If I solved one for W and then plugged it into the other one, or my W is going to be gone.
Hang on, say that again.
Yeah, what?
Yeah, say that again.
If I solved this equation for W and got L on the right side, and then I plugged it in over here for W,
Oh.
my W's are going to be gone, right?
Yeah.
Okay? So that's what we need to do if we're trying to find length. We need to solve for W so we can make it go away when we substitute in our other equation. So to solve for W here, I need to do what first?
Get it by itself.
Subtract 2L.
Subtract 2L. So I have 2W equals negative 2L plus 440.
Does the 2L have to be in front of 140? Or
For
does it
standard
matter?
form, let's keep it in front, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And then
Subtract or divide by 2.
divide by 2. So I have W equals negative L plus
220.
220. And now that I know what W is equal to, I can do what? Plug it in. So on this side, I have L times
Negative
L plus
negative
220.
L
plus 220.
plus 220 is
It's
greater than or equal to 8,000. Okay, does everybody now see why I solved for W?
Yes.
Okay, my L or my W's are gone now, and all they wanted us to find was my possible length. So now I'm going to have an equation with just L's.
Negative L squared.
Negative L squared
Plus 220
plus
L
220 L
is greater than or equal to or 8,000.
Okay. Now to solve this, I have to have it equal to,
0.
I guess not equal in this case, but so I subtracted my 8,000, so now it's greater than or equal to 0. Okay.
No.
Now, I don't really like A to be negative. Is it okay if I change all the signs?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's what I would do. Are you going to get the same answer if you don't?
Yeah, yes.
Yes. So I'm going to change it to L squared minus 220L plus 8,000 greater than or equal to 0. Okay. However, I just divided by a negative.
Oh, you guys flip this.
Uh-huh.
Where,
Yeah.
where did you divide? Didn't you multiply?
No.
It doesn't matter. If you multiply by a negative, you got to do the same thing. Okay. Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you're going to change all those signs, you got to flip your sign. So now I should be able to plug this in to quadratic formula and figure out what my range for L's are, correct? Okay, so hopefully you guys got a calculator handy because some of these numbers might be kind of big. So negative B is positive 220 plus or minus the square root of negative 220 squared minus 4 times A times C all over 2 times 1, which is 2. And we got 220 squared.
48,400.
48,400 minus 32,000 over 2. $48,400 minus 32,000 is 16,400. Okay, and that's going to come out as a decimal. Okay. Looking here at what they're showing us, they're showing that they're asking for approximations. Okay, so go ahead and plug this in. 220 plus this divided by 2, and let's round that to the nearest whole number.
$311.
I don't think so.
174.
Is it
174 point what?
103.
So about 174.
174 at the most.
And what's the other way?
Minus. So 46.
46.
Yep.
It's like 45.9 something.
Wait,
Go
why
ahead.
would you take the square root of 16,000?
Of what?
16,000.
You did.
They did. It comes out as a decimal though. So what I would recommend is doing 220 plus the square root of this, hitting enter on your calculator, and then dividing it by 2. Just so you're not rounding too early.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so we get two answers, 174 and 46. Okay? But I don't know where to shade. Now, if you think about this a little bit and what we're talking about a rectangle, right? A rectangular parking lot, agreed? Okay? Is it going to make any sense, because we're talking about area and perimeter, would it make any sense for your options to be outside of this?
No.
No, because this one would end up going negative, and this one would end up going to infinity, right? And so that's not going to make a lot of sense if you're talking about area. So, just using a little logic, I would know since it's less than or equal to, it's going to be a closed circle on both. Using some logic, you should be able to figure out that you're going to shade in between. Okay? If you didn't catch that, what should you have done? Plug in probably 0, right? And if you were to do that, if I plugged in 0 for L, yeah, I guess this was an L, not an X. Huh? Okay, if I plugged in 0 for L, is 8,000 less than or equal to 0?
No.
No. And 0's on the outside, so we need to shade on the inside. Okay. Now, is that our answer?
No.
No.
Of course not.
My answer is that my length could be,
Less
Less
than.
than or equal to.
so I'm not sure how they're wording it because I'm worried about.
Greater than 46 and less than 47.
So it has to be at least 46, but no more than 174. But if you were putting it as an inequality, it's going to be an and statement, right?
So you have to do the 2 less than or greater.
46 is less than L.
46 is less than or equal to L, which is less than or equal to
174.
174.
So the way you tell if it's and or is if it's shaded inside or outside?
The way
Yes.
you tell whether it's and or is whether it's shaded in the middle or on the outside, yes. Okay? So, you should be able to finish that assignment now. If you need a little bit of time tomorrow, actually tomorrow you won't have any time. If you need a little bit of time to finish a couple problems, you can do them as homework tomorrow if you'd like. Okay, but you need to have 95% of this assignment done for tomorrow.
You're not gonna be here?
What's happening
I'll
tomorrow?
be here.
What's going on tomorrow?
I'll tell you tomorrow.
Oh no.
You're killing me.
Don't forget that our test is on Tuesday.
Oh,